Welcome to this session about practical examples for Docker containers on Windows. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Tobias Fenster. I'm a CTO at a German NAV ISV called Axios Infoma, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP for business solutions, mainly in the NAV and Business Central area. If you want to follow what I'm doing, here's my Twitter handle, my blog URL, and also my GitHub URL. Where I'm not only blogging about NAV and Business Central, but also a lot about Docker containers and Windows, and also something about TFS and automation in that area as well. The topic today is practical examples about Windows containers. The reason for that is that I had a previous session at the MVP days on April. If you maybe followed that one, there was more around the reasoning why it makes sense to have Docker containers on Windows and how they can be used, and also some sample code, but not too many practical examples. And today we'll dig a bit more into that, and I'll show you the actual commands and how they look like and how you can work with them. But first of all, I also have to mention that a lot of the samples I'll be showing is based on code by Elton Stoneman, who is a very recommended follow on Twitter if you want to learn about Windows containers and Docker in general. And I've also built on the Microsoft samples that you can find on GitHub about building .NET applications inside a container, and also about Windows containers in general. A lot of those samples I've adjusted a bit to make them easier to understand, or maybe show the things that I wanted to show you, but they're really, a lot of that is built on those samples. What are we going to do today? A topic like that won't be complete without a first hello world, so I'll show you how you can run your first container, and then we'll do a bit more advanced, like creating our own images using an installer, using sources. Then we're gonna show the multi-stage images that have a build and a run part to optimize your images. And in the end, we're going to do multiple containers at once using something that's called Docker Compose that makes it easier to run more complex applications and to run them and manage them with ease. Along those topics, I'll show you a couple of tools as well and how you can use those. Okay, what does mean running your first container? It means you're going to download the image if that image is not already locally available, and I've downloaded everything that I'll need today because we don't want to look at the download screen while we're having that session. So I've pre-downloaded everything, but essentially if you're doing a Docker run, then it checks if that image is locally available. If yes, then it's just going to create a container from that image and start it. And if not, it's going to download that image and then create a container and start it. We'll use a nano server based sample image which Microsoft provides, and it's called .NET App Nano Server, and that is built by Microsoft and provided through the .NET Samples repository. Get straight to Visual Studio Code, which I'm going to use to show those demos because it has a very nice Docker extension. If you haven't used that before, you should really download that one to get you started because it's really easy to use in that way. You can see here that it's adding that Docker tab or whatever those are called, and you can see now we have a couple of images already downloaded. You can see I have a lot of Microsoft images and one of the Docker sample images, and you can see here those are different versions and different releases, and you can see how old they are. And what the exact name of those images are, and we'll use a lot of those in the later demos. And also you can see here running containers. That is empty because currently I don't have any running or stopped containers, but this will fill up while we're going through the demos. Okay, so let me have the first sample. I have those here as code fragments, so you don't have to watch me mistype stuff. I'll just run that one. You can see here below I'm gonna run the command that you see up here in the terminal down here. So we're gonna run the first one, which is the .NET App Nano Server sample, and I'll maximize that one. And now you can see here this is essentially a small demo container which just says welcome to using .NET Core. and shows that guy here, outputs the environment, and with that we're done. If I go to the containers again here, you can now see here that we have one. That one has already exited because the sample only shows that output and then stops. You can see here that it has a generated name, and you can see here that this is the image that was used. And the little red dot here says that that one has already exited and stopped, and now we can just with a right click remove that one, or we could restart it, or we could show the logs, which we'll do later. But for now, I'll just remove that one, and with that, it's gone again. Okay, so this was our first .NET Nano server. The second example now is that you maybe have an application with an installer, traditional MSI or whatever, and you want to put it in a container because of the reasons that we discussed in April. And the steps for that would be to create your own Docker file that installs and then later runs the application. The installing is done in a step that's called Docker build, and Docker build basically goes through the Docker file, follows the directions that are in there, and in the end you have your own image. We're going to do that, so in the end we'll have an image based on that Docker file, and then we can run that image, and obviously we're going to check if the container is running and connect it. What we'll do is we'll install an Apache web server and just start that one to see that it's serving content. How does that look like? Let's go back to the samples. We've done that one, so I'll just get rid of that. And my second sample is installing, so I'm going to move in the directory that I need, and then we're going to start the build. That's going to take a bit, so I start it now, and then we'll look into the Docker file to see what it's actually doing. Sorry, I need a second container, second terminal for that, as the first one now is blocked. Okay, here's the Docker file. So what is this doing? It says it's built based on Windows Server Core. We're not providing any version information for that one. We'll do that later. So that means it's just grabbing the latest Windows Server Core, which is compatible to our environment. We have a label here. You can use labels to describe your images. In that example, it's setting a description label, it's setting a vendor label, and it's setting a version label, which is actually not correct now that I look at it. You could change that easily just by changing the file. I've pre-downloaded the download for Apache and also for the C++ libraries that I need, and I'm just copying those to the root of my new container. So this is the source that I want to copy, and this is the target root of my environment. And then we're going to run two PowerShell commands. The first one is expanding the archive to C, and then it's removing the zip file. And the second one is starting my C++ redistributable installation. It does use the quiet command because I don't have a graphical user interface that I could use to accept any license agreement, config, whatever. It just has to run quietly. And in the end, I'm removing that one as well. And then we're going to start the Apache web server itself by calling the HTTPD exe file. So this is kind of a typical Docker file. We're moving some stuff that we already have inside of our environment into the container. We're then running stuff, and then we're telling it when the container will eventually start what to do. So this is happening during the build. And I can show you here what has happened. You can always see that those are the steps. They create what's called a layer inside of that image. So if I'm later doing the same again and I'm changing the command here, then it's able to use the layers before because those layers didn't change. And you can see here that it's creating a temporary container in between, and it's running whatever it needs to do in that step, and then it's removing that container again. So it's based on Windows Server Core. It's setting the labels, it's copying the stuff over, it's expanding and removing, and it's expanding and remove, or it's installing and removing again. And in the end, it knows that the command, if we don't say anything else, will be to run the Apache web server. And in the end, you can see that this has been successfully tagged as my name and then Apache latest, which is because if we check back for the build command, we say that as a tag or as a name, we want to use tfenster Apache. So in the end, we will have exactly that image. When we check back into our environment, you can see that now a tfenster Apache image has appeared, and we can just start that one. So with that, let's just run it. And that should just start our container. Okay, so what you can see here now is the output, and you can see that Apache complains that it doesn't know the fully qualified domain name. So this is basically telling me that I'm not 100% configured as it expects it to be, but it will still run. But this is already output from inside of the container. So you can see here, if I'm only doing a Docker run, then I see all the output. Let's use another command, which is called docker ps, and that shows me the containers which are up and running. And again, I get a generated name. I copy that one and use it for the next one. As we need to know which IP address we have, I'm doing a docker exec, and that is just running a process inside of my container. And I'm telling it I want to run inside of that container, and I want to run ipconfig to find out which IP address the container got. So I can see here now that I got this IP address. I didn't add any additional networking configuration, so it's just using the internal Docker network. And with that, I now know what I need to call. Let's check back. Okay, it says it works, which is the Apache start screen if we don't change anything. I'll leave full screen so you can see this is calling this IP address, and it responds as expected. Now, what if I want to change something inside of that container? We can do that as well. We're going to do a docker exec again, which is to say that we're starting a process again, but I tell it with that arguments that I want to have it as an attached terminal, and I want to have it interactive. So that means I get a session with that command, and I use PowerShell as my command name. So this basically gives me a PowerShell session inside of the container. So I'll run that one. Now I get a PowerShell session inside of the container. If I say host name, you will see that this has some generated name, but I really am inside of that container. And now I switch to the htdocs and just set that one as the content of my index.html file. So basically we're changing the start screen of the container of the Apache. And you can see here that copying and pasting has some limitations here. But nevertheless, now we should have a changed start screen. So we had a session inside of the container, we changed the file, and obviously that has effects on how the container behaves. And in the end, let's just remove that one as well. Oh, sorry. If I don't do the -f, then what happens is oh, I need to leave the container. Now if I do docker rm, then it says you cannot remove a running container. So I would have to stop that one and then remove it, or if I had a force command, force argument here, then it will just remove that one, and you can see here now we have that, no longer have that container anymore. Okay, so this was the second example, how to install a base container application using an installer. You could do the same using an MSI, just make sure that it doesn't have any graphical user interface interaction, so it has a quiet install mode, and you don't get anything in there. creating an image from the sources. Now assume you have the sources for an application, because maybe that application is built inside of your company and you want to put that in a container as well. The steps now would be that you can create a Docker file that maybe compiles the sources if the sources need to be compiled, and then installs and runs the application. Again, we're going to create an image from that Docker file and use it. In our example, we just copy one file over because it's an ASPX file that doesn't need to be compiled or will be auto-compiled when it's called. And we'll do something more complex in the next sample, but just start with an easy one. So to get back to my predefined stuff. Okay, now we're here and I'll start the Docker build again and we'll look into the Docker file again. Here. So how does that Docker file look? Let me close the other one. We don't need that anymore. It's just saying I want to build on top of ASP.NET, and I'm just copying over the default ASPX file into that one. And there currently is a bug that's making that not work. So we're adding administration, adding the IIS app pool default app account to the administrators group. That usually shouldn't be necessary, but currently is, but a fix for that is already in the works. So how does that default ASPX file look like? That's also a simple one. It gets the current machine name and does some CSS stuff, and then says hello from that machine, so we know that we're inside of that container. Let's see how our Docker build has come along. You can see here that it has built on top of ASP.NET. It has copied the default ASPX file. Let's get back to the Docker file. It has run our PowerShell command and added the local group member. Now that one is a shell command that says that for future commands that I'm going to run, we're going to use PowerShell as the base. The default for Windows containers is just plain CMD, but if you want to change that, you can use that shell command, which then tells it to use PowerShell as your default, and now we can run simply Docker PowerShell commandlets without adding the PowerShell stuff in front. That's easier if you want to go through multiple PowerShell commandlets. And in the end, we again have our Fenster hostname app image built, so we should see it here. As you can see, now we have a hostname app, and with that we can run it. And we give it a name, because I don't want to have the generated name in that case, and we're gonna give it a host name, because as we've seen, the sample will return the host name, and to get something meaningful there, I'm setting the host name. And when that one has started, we're gonna again check for the IP address and call that one. So let's see how far we are. Yes, we already have one. Move that over here, start it. And you can see that it's loading, and we should hopefully get our start screen soon. IIS takes a bit to load, and yeah, here we are now. This is the hostname that we set, so it says hello from hostname test in that case. Okay, we could again go into that one, look around, and in the end we would remove it again. Just to show you, you can easily do that as well here by removing, by attaching a shell. With that we also get a shell inside of that container, and we can also show the logs. So this is just during a docker logs command, you can see here, and this will give us the logs inside of that container. Nothing's happening there currently, so I don't see anything, but this is the easy and convenient way to get to the logs to remove something and start a command as well. Let's remove that one again and remove our container. And with that, you can now see here, this was my docker run command. That one has finished as well. Okay, so the next one, will be something that's called a multi-stage image. And the use case for that is that you have the sources for an application, you need to compile that, and you want to put the running result inside a container. But the base idea for containers always is to have the minimum amount of things that you need inside of that container. So the container that, or the image that will actually run our application should be as small as possible. And we can achieve that by using a multi-stage image. That means that we have two parts in our Docker file. The first one does the compilation, and the second one does the install. And the first one does the compilation and the install, and the second one just gets the results of the compilation and install and runs them. So let's see how that works, and we're going to use an ASP.NET application again. Back to my snippets and run that Docker build and go to the second CMD and look inside of the container file. Close the other one. So we're now building on top of an image that's called .NET Framework 4.7.2 SDK. Because we're going to do a build, we need the full SDK. And now we're copying the solution, the project files, the configs, and doing a restore of the packages so that we have every library that we need. The base image just provides the SDK, but we need additional libraries, and we can just fetch them. And then we copy the whole application over by copying my full ASP.NET App application, and we run an MS build. So that is basically a typical way to compile your ASP.NET application. And it's described here in a very easy way, so there's also no need for additional documentation. You just can go through those steps, and development can tell the operations people easily through their Docker file how the application is built. And the second step now is that we again have a from statement, and in that case we're just using ASP.NET, not the SDK anymore. So we have our runtime and we're copying everything from the build stage. You can see here that we're naming that one build, and we're referencing that one here. And we're copying everything from our app ASP.NET app, where the build actually has happened, and are moving it into the init www root directory to make sure that it's available for IaaS. So let's see, that one has run through as well. You can see here, if we go to the top, we have the copying is happening, we have the package restore is happening, and then MS build starts. We can see a lot of output from that one. I'll just scroll through that. The important thing is that we don't have any warnings and we don't have any errors. That happens within 13 seconds. And then you can see here that we have the second from statement. So now we're moving to the runtime, copying stuff over, and in the end we have an ASP.NET app image, and that one should appear here as well. Yes, it's here. So with that we can just start that one. Go back here, check. Yeah, we have one here. Name again. Check for the IP address. And also open that one. So now it's loading, and it should hopefully show our ASP.NET app application. Let's see if that works. Okay. Yeah, here we are. That's the demo ASP.NET application, and I just changed a little bit to show you that it's actually compiling the stuff that I have provided. Yeah, you can see it's just the ASP.NET application that is run. So we've built it, we've put it inside of our container, and it just uses the stuff that's there to run it. With that, you can make sure that the build is always working. It's not dependent on anything that's running on the developer machine, but it's just working inside of the container, and that should work always. because we're also explicitly referencing a specific .NET framework version, we're also sure that it's always the same one. There are no differences in production environments because we're always building on 4.7.2. Okay, with that we remove that container again and switch to the last sample, which is running multiple containers at once. What we've seen until now are only single containers, but usually applications are made up of more parts than should be done in one container. So we could have, for example, a database, a middle tier, a web front end, a reverse proxy, multiple front ends, whatever. And you want to manage those together and describe what you need in an easy way. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a necessary image. So we're doing a build basically again, and we'll also reuse a standard SQL Server image that's already there because we're going to use a SQL Server to back our application. And that's done in something that's called a compose file, and then we can run docker compose up. How does that look like? Switching back here, changing to my last sample, and starting the build again. What are we doing this time? Now I need to switch. Sorry. So we're again, oh no, that's the wrong one. No, that's the one that I need. We're building this time based on a different build image because it has a bit more additional tooling. It's the 4.7.1 one. But basically it's doing the same. It's copying the packages config over, restoring the packages, doing an MS build, and then have a second stage that's just using 4.7.1. It's removing the sample website or the default website, creating a new one. It has a health check as well. That means that every 5 seconds Docker is going to check if that one is available so that it knows that the container is still healthy. It uses a bootstrap PS1 file because it's doing a bit more when it starts. And in the end, it's just copying again all the stuff that we built, putting it into a sign-up web folder, and it's running that application. So how does that look like if we compose up that? Just let me check if the build has finished. No, it's in its last stages. So that one should be done in a second. It's again just adding the default app pool account to the administrators group to make sure that bug that I mentioned before is not happening. If we go through the steps quickly, you can see here that it's also doing the compilation. Let's go all the way to the top. That's a rather long one. Here we are. It's copying stuff over. It's doing the package restore. It's doing the build. Again, what matters to us is that it's done, that it doesn't have any errors. Let's see, that should be happening here. No warnings, no errors. And then we're in our runtime environment and doing the stuff that I just mentioned. So now what we're going to do is a compose up. You can see that command here. I'm going to start that one. And to show you what that does, we're going to look inside of that Docker compose file. So this has a number of services, and the first one is the database service, which is built on top of SQL Server Express. For that, we only need that image. We run it. You need to accept the end user license agreement. So this is an environment parameter that you need to always set. Then we are referencing another file, and we're telling it we want to use our internal application network. And the second one is our sign-up web application that we just built. We're telling it to run on port 80, and we're using the same credentials environments file and tell it that it only has to start after the database is available because we need that database again. So this is basically the same as our Docker run, the same parameters, but we have it in a file now, so we can easily manage multiple containers together and have the run parameters also stored inside of our file. what does the credentials file look like? That it's easy. I'm just setting a password and telling it to do the database connection to our SignUpDB application and using the same password again. So let's see if we have here running here. You can see that that one has created the database and that one has created the web application. And let's see what IP address we got. It's that one here. Oh. Yeah. So this is our application. I can sign up, give it my name, give it my company, and I am, let's say, an engineer, and say go. And now this is calling into our database server image. Let's see if that one has worked. I'm starting SQL operations tool and getting the IP address of our database container as well. So it's that one here. And if we start the Operations Studio and connect to that database server or that database container, let's see, a new connection. Entering the credentials that I just gave it. And now you can see here I have my sign up database. And if we look into the prospects, I think is the one that we need, and check the content of that table, we should see the sign up that I just did. Let's see, here we are. This is the one that I just gave it. So with that, you see that we have multiple containers, the database container and the IIS container, and they work together to provide the application that I need. And in the end, if I don't want to have that anymore, let's see here, you can see here are the two containers that we've created. And if I in the end just do a Docker compose down and start that one, then those two containers will just go away. They're stopped and removed and everything's gone. Okay, I'm already running late, so I finished quickly. That was the presentation about a couple of samples. First one was about the Hello World one, then creating an application container using an installer, creating it from sources, using the multi-stage approach to make sure that the actually running container using your application is as small as possible. And then we've seen how we can use Docker Compose to manage multiple containers with the same command. So thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for your interest, and I hope you've learned a bit about how and why Docker containers on Windows do make a lot of sense. Thanks.